On Saturday, April 29, 1994, June Nicholas found her aunt, 89-year-old Lillian DeCloe, dead on the bedroom floor of her yellow brick home at 1550 Northwest South Avenue in Pompano Beach, Florida. She had been beaten, assaulted, and strangled in broad daylight, and not a single person knew who did it. This tragic story would lead investigators down an unlikely path of DNA evidence and forensic investigation that revealed a shocking truth at the end. For the next 28 years, June and the rest of Lillian's family would sink deeper and deeper into a web of grief and anguish over the simple question: who would want to hurt a harmless 89-year-old woman? Today's story takes us back 3 decades to the violent murder of Lillian DeCloe in 1994. Our story today takes us to Pompano Beach, Florida, a picturesque city in Broward County, Florida. Pompano Beach is named after pompano, a once abundant species of fish caught off the shores of the city's beaches that boast soft golden sands and azure blue waters. Today, Pompano City is a busy city with a violent crime rate of 7.29 per 1,000 residents yearly. But in the 1990s, Pompano Beach had the highest tax rate in the country because its population and economy were not growing. Life was slow, and the violent crime rate was high, at a rate of about 2,886 victims of violent crimes per 100,000 residents. But despite the crime rate in 1994, Pompano Beach was a place that an 89-year-old like Lillian DeCloe could enjoy after a youth well spent. Lillian DeCloe was born in 1905. As a young woman, Lillian dedicated herself to helping others, especially through her careers as a nurse and teacher. She was kind, patient, and caring, and loved by everyone who knew her, from her students and patients to her co-workers and neighbors. On the long list of people who loved Lillian was her niece, June Nicholas. When June and her siblings and cousins were younger, Lillian helped care for them and teach them. As Lillian got older and started suffering from memory loss and aging-related illnesses, June took care of her, and Lillian moved to Pompano Beach in Florida to enjoy the twilight years of her life in peace. To everyone who knew her, 89-year-old Lillian DeCloe was a prime example of a life well lived. Having spent her years serving her community as a teacher and nurse, Lillian spent her retirement in her yellow brick home at 1550 Northwest 7th Avenue, Pompano Beach. There she led a quiet and uneventful life by herself, until violence snuck in on her through her bedroom window, shattering the peace. April 29, 1994 was a Saturday like any other for Lillian DeCloe. She spent the day relaxing in her pink and white checkered nightgown, expecting a visit from her niece June later that evening. June had begun caring for her Aunt Lillian as she aged, and she would frequently visit Lillian to check on her and help with chores, keep track of medication, or keep her company. Around 6 p.m. on that fateful day, June arrived at Lillian's home as usual to check up on her and drop off some groceries she had gotten for her. When she entered the house, she couldn't find Lillian in the living room, so June called out asking where she was. June checked the first bedroom where Lillian usually took her naps, but still couldn't find her. Feeling slightly alarmed, June went down the hallway and looked into the bedroom on the right. There, lying on the floor, was her Aunt Lillian, who from all appearances was dead. June screamed and ran back up the hall to call 911. 2 officers from the Pompano Beach Police Department responded to June's 911 call, their minds racing with questions. It was not every day you heard of an 89-year-old woman getting murdered in her own house, so it seemed like a strange call. Upon arriving at the scene at 1550 Northwest 7th Avenue, the officers confirmed that Lillian was dead. Lying on the floor beside a toppled floor lamp and a telephone with the cord pulled out, Lillian had wounds and bruises all over her face and body that indicated she had been beaten. There were bloody towels and other pieces of clothing littered around the room. The officers also noticed a broken window in the room where Lillian's body was found, where Lillian's attackers had likely entered from. The house had been ransacked, and the several broken pieces of furniture strewn across the room indicated that there had likely been a vicious struggle as Lillian fought for her life. Lillian's body was in such a shocking state that at first glance it seemed to be a crime of passion. Lillian had contusions all over her body. Her ribs, nose, and wrist were fractured. She also had bruising around her genitals that suggested that she had been assaulted before being killed. The bruises on her neck also meant she had been strangled. The Broward Medical Examiner's office would conduct an autopsy on Lillian and conclude that she had died from asphyxiation and also suffered a blow to the head. The telephone with the cord pulled out, found next to Lillian's body, was what the attacker used to strangle her. However, there was no indication that Lillian was specifically targeted by her attacker, meaning the crime was likely not of passion. Lillian was generally beloved in her community, so she had no enemies. According to Lieutenant Earl Fluellen from the Pompano Beach Police Department, the scene of the crime and the general state of the house indicated that the case was likely that of a burglary gone wrong, but that did not make sense to Lillian's family members, who knew that Lillian lived alone and did not have any money worth losing her life for. June recalled that Lillian did not have more than $50 at the house at the time of the incident. After searching the house, the only item that appeared to be missing was a gold wedding band. After gathering evidence from the crime scene, police officers began interviewing Lillian's neighbors to find out if they had heard or seen anything related to Lillian's murder. But according to the neighbors, the last time they saw Lillian was around 6:50 a.m. that morning when she went to buy a newspaper. She looked hale and hearty, and no one could recall seeing anything suspicious, even though the murder occurred in broad daylight. After only a few days, detectives had come up with a list of potential suspects in Lillian's murder, but they still did not have enough to make an arrest. To motivate people to try and remember anything they could have seen or heard that could help with the investigation, the police put out a $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Lillian's murderer. Pompano Beach Police spokeswoman Sandra King also told the media that the police were looking for anyone who knew anything about the crime or the man responsible for it. In an interview with the Sun-Sentinel, King said, "At this point, we are urging anyone who saw anything to call us. Some kind of human monster is walking around freely with the blood of a harmless 89-year-old woman on their hands." But despite this promising progress the investigation made in the first few weeks, all the leads soon dried up, and the case grew cold. Meanwhile, June Nicholas was grieving the loss of her beloved Aunt Lillian. She had to take a whole year off of work because it was just so hard to move on without her aunt, and without knowing what happened or who hurt her in that manner. The grief got so heavy that she had to ask someone else to take care of her kids for a few months because she was hurting too much to care for them. She couldn't wash the image of Lillian lying lifeless on the floor away from her mind, no matter how hard she tried. As if this wasn't bad enough, the case went cold, dashing all her hopes of discovering what had really happened to Lillian. For the next 10 years, there were no new updates in the DeCloe case, and it was shelved and forgotten about. But by 1999, the Broward Sheriff's Office had begun providing law enforcement services to Pompano Beach. This included taking over all of Pompano Beach's cold cases. By 2004, one of the cold cases that the Broward Sheriff's Office detectives reopened was the 1994 homicide of Lillian DeCloe. Detective David Towsley with the Broward Sheriff's Office headed the investigation with the help from other detectives from the unit. They reviewed old case files, DNA databases, and re-examined evidence collected from the crime scene almost 30 years earlier. One piece of evidence that stood out was the pink and white checkered nightgown that Lillian was wearing on the day she was murdered. When they sent this nightgown to the lab to be retested, they discovered that it had bodily fluids from the male attacker, which was perhaps the most crucial piece of evidence in solving the mystery. When the police developed a genetic profile from the fluid sample obtained from the nightgown, they entered the information into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, but they could not find a match. Once again, a promising lead had dried up, and the case went cold. However, Detective Towsley was determined to close the case of Lillian DeCloe so that her family could find closure and move on. And so even if it took another 15 years, Detective Towsley's dogged determination led him to re-examine the case in 2019 under the Broward Sheriff's Office newly created Cold Case Unit. According to Jennifer Parker, the Broward Sheriff's Office criminalist in charge of conducting the DNA analysis of the evidence in the case, it did not initially seem like anything would come from reinvestigating the DeCloe case. But thanks to advancements in DNA testing technology, Towsley believed he could unravel the identity of the individual who left their bodily fluid on Lillian's nightdress. Armed with this new technology, analysis at Broward County Crime Lab obtained a more thorough DNA profile. In 2021, Detective Towsley and his team asked the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to use the DNA profile to conduct a familial search of its offender database. That is, they ran the DNA profile through the database of registered offenders and people who had been arrested. This technique matches the DNA profile with the possible first-order relatives in the database, such as a child, father, or sibling. The search resulted in a match. The DNA from the crime scene shared overwhelming similarities with that of a known offender in the system. The offender turned out to be the son of the man whose DNA was found on the dress Lillian DeCloe was wearing on the day she was murdered. This man's name was Johnny Mack Brown. Johnny Mack Brown was born in 1954, making him 40 years old at the time of Lillian DeCloe's murder. A Vietnam War veteran who suffered from PTSD, life after the military was not good for Johnny. His PTSD made him resort to drug use, which eventually resulted in drug addiction. And because of his mental health issues and addiction, he could not find steady jobs. For a long time, Johnny became homeless as well. When investigators were initially investigating Lillian's death, John was never considered a suspect in the case or any other crime. He was entirely under the radar. However, when police made the match with Johnny's DNA profile, it became more apparent that he was very likely the man who had attacked Lillian on that fateful day. Police also discovered a crucial piece of information. In the early 1990s through 1994, Johnny lived only a few houses away from Lillian, but detectives could not arrest Johnny for questioning because he was dead. He died of natural causes in 2010 at the age of 56. Johnny was buried in the South Florida National Cemetery in Lake Worth, Florida. In August 2022, a judge granted Broward Sheriff's Office detectives requests to exhume Johnny's remains for examination. The detectives worked with the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, the Palm Beach Medical Examiner's Office, and a forensic anthropologist to exhume the remains and test them for DNA. The experts took samples from Johnny's body, and the Broward Sheriff's Office criminalist Jennifer Parker tested them in the Broward Sheriff's Office crime lab, comparing them to the existing DNA profile. To get the most accurate result possible, Parker took some of the bone marrow from Johnny's rib bone for testing. The test resulted in a match with the existing DNA profile from the sample found at the crime scene. According to the Broward Sheriff's Office, the DNA results showed that the DNA from the crime scene was 66.8 trillion times more likely to be from Johnny than from somebody else. With this conclusive evidence, there was no doubt that the killer in Lillian DeCloe's case was Johnny Mack Brown, but that still did not explain why Johnny did what he did. The earlier assumption that it was just a case of burglary gone bad seemed to be the best explanation for the whole incident. In a press conference, Broward County Sheriff Gregory Toney explained that it was most likely a crime of opportunity. He lived close by, only a few houses down, the sheriff said. When he fell on hard times and he went homeless and had a drug habit, it indicated that he broke into the house. He may or may not have known she was there alone, but she was 89, she lived by herself, and it looked like all the drawers were opened and things were gone through the house. Police presented all the evidence they had collected thus far to the Broward State Attorney's Office. There, the prosecutors reviewed the case and concluded that Johnny Mack Brown was involved in the death of Lillian DeCloe. The case was closed. Although 28 years is a long time to await justice, Sheriff Toney believes justice has no expiration date, he said. So long as we are responsible for investigating these cases, we are going to continue to push for the necessary manpower and effort to make sure that we can bring closure to so many families who have been waiting for decades time and time again in the hope that they get some resolution. Lillian DeCloe's family spent 28 years praying for answers to the mysterious circumstances surrounding the death of their beloved Lillian. Finally, they have gotten the answers they were searching for, and they can now begin to move on. June Nicholas, the niece who found Lillian's cold body all those years ago, says she feels happy about the dedication of the Broward Sheriff's Office in uncovering the truth about her aunt's death. She believes now her aunt can finally rest in peace. I know wherever she is, she can sleep in peace. We can move on, she said. We can die in peace, because we know that it wasn't a murder that was unsolved. Although we end the story with the full knowledge of who killed Lillian DeCloe, some questions cannot help but persist in our minds, demanding answers. For one, we may never know why Johnny Mack Brown did what he did, or if he felt guilty about it in the years that followed. Did the investigators take too long to find out who the real killer was? Can we genuinely say that justice was served in this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any case you want us to cover on this channel, please drop your suggestions in the comments. If you enjoyed today's story, kindly give it a like and a share. Also, subscribe to this channel and turn on post notifications so you're the first to know when a new video drops.